For centuries, the story of Santa's workshop has been a tale of joy, but today we're going to uncover a darker truth. Beneath the perpetual snows of the North Pole lies a forgotten site, the original Santa's workshop, now a desolate monument to a sinister event. Prepare to hear the unsettling folklore and fragmented accounts that reveal why this magical place was deserted. The first time I heard there was an original workshop, I laughed the way you do when your brain rejects something too strange to hold. Santa had one workshop. Everyone knew that. Bright windows, warm lamplight, toy parts stacked like candy, laughter that somehow survived blizzards and centuries. That picture was so widely accepted it felt less like a story and more like a law of nature. But myths have seams, and seams split when you pull at them long enough. I pulled because of a footnote, one thin line buried in a brittle Scandinavian shipping ledger from the 1890s. It mentioned a supply run to a North manufactory, then, scratched out so aggressively the paper puckered, an older coordinate set labeled Forst Verksted, First Workshop. The replacement coordinates were neat, almost polite, as if someone had come back later with calmer hands and better ink. I've spent years chasing forged documents and edited histories, and I know what panic looks like on paper. That ledger looked like fear trying to erase itself. When I told Jonah Whitby, an archivist who collects polar expedition journals the way others collect vinyl, he didn't tease me. He locked his office door and slid a folder across his desk without letting his fingers leave the cardboard for long. Inside were photocopied pages from a 1912 Explorer log, half the text water-warped, the rest written in tight, rushed script. A man named Captain Eamon Klein described reaching an area where the aurora hung low like a ceiling, where the dogs refused to pull and the men stopped speaking because sound felt discourteous. He wrote one more line, underlined 3 times. We found a chimney with no soot and a bell that rang without wind. Even then, I could have walked away. I should have. There are mysteries that stay charming as long as you don't solve them. But the next clue wasn't a clue at all. It was a warning. A torn scrap from an indigenous legend Jonah refused to fully translate, only paraphrase in a voice that made him sound like someone else. It spoke of a maker in the snow who shaped gifts to keep children smiling so they wouldn't cry out into the dark. Because the dark listened. Because the dark remembered names. And because, when the maker tired, the listening thing came closer, not with footsteps, but with the absence of them. I started assembling this story the way you assemble a shattered ornament. Gently, knowing the edges are sharp. There were hints in old maps where cartographers had drawn decorative snowflakes to fill blank space. On 2 separate charts, different decades, those snowflakes overlapped the same region like an intentional cover-up. Pretty ink disguising an omission. Another record, a church registry from a remote Norwegian outpost, listed a winter where no children were baptized because the pastor could not hear the congregation. That line didn't make sense until you realized they weren't saying the pastor was absent. They were saying sound itself failed. I booked a flight north under the kind of pretense that makes officials relax. Environmental survey, equipment testing, a documentary about polar light. My pilot, Anya Kivinen, had the weathered calm of someone who can read a horizon like a book. She didn't ask why my cargo included thermal microphones and old-fashioned tape recorders alongside satellite phones. She only asked one thing as we loaded fuel drums. If you hear bells while we're grounded, do not follow them. Promise me. She said it like an instruction you give a child near deep water. The North doesn't greet you. It permits you. On the second day, the landscape turned into an endless blank page, and my mind began writing nonsense across it. Faces in snowdrifts, smoke where there was none, the faint sense of being watched from behind the sky. When we landed at the last research station that would tolerate us, the station manager took my paperwork, skimmed it, then stared at my name as if it were a stain. You're going farther than you should, he said. There are places the compass avoids. There are places radios won't carry your voice. He handed my papers back without stamping them. If you go anyway, do not bring a list. That night, in the thin warmth of the station dormitory, I listened to Jonah's recordings through headphones until my ears hurt. Most of it was hiss and wind. But threaded through the noise was something that made my stomach tighten. A workshop rhythm. Not music work. A distant tap-tap of tools, a scrape like wood on wood, and once, unmistakably, the soft jingle of a bell. The timestamp said the audio had been captured in the 1970s by a glaciology team that swore they recorded nothing but ambient wind. Yet there it was, steady as breathing. I tried to sleep and failed. In the half-dream between closing my eyes and opening them again, I saw a corridor of carved timber. Lanterns hung from hooks, their flames perfectly still, as if oxygen had learned to behave. The air smelled like sap and peppermint, but underneath was a colder scent, metallic and old. Then I heard it, a whisper that didn't form words so much as shapes, curves and hooks that snagged my thoughts. I sat up so fast my spine cracked, and for a second I couldn't remember my own name. The next morning, Anya pointed at the horizon, where the sky looked bruised. "Weather's changing," she said, "or something is pretending to be weather." We flew anyway over pressure ridges like frozen waves and ice fields that gleamed with a cruel, clean light. As we neared the coordinates from the scratched-out ledger, my instruments began to misbehave. The GPS lagged by seconds, then minutes, as if time had thickened. The compass needle trembled, then drifted in slow circles like a tired animal. The radio picked up a faint tone, too pure to be static, too steady to be human. And then, in the white distance, I saw it, a shape that didn't belong to geology. Straight lines, angles, a roofline half swallowed by drifted snow. A chimney dark against the pale world, rising like a single accusing finger. The structure looked small at first, almost quaint, until the scale corrected itself in my mind and I realized it was enormous, more like a factory than a cottage. A place built to produce wonder at industrial speed. Anya set the aircraft down a cautious distance away. The moment the skids touched the ice, the world seemed to quiet in a way that felt intentional. Even the wind softened, not dying but stepping back. When we climbed out, my breath fogged the air, then fell straight down as if gravity had grown heavier. I took 3 steps toward the buried building and stopped, because there were footprints in the snow. Not fresh, not old, not softened by wind. They looked pressed into powder that should have collapsed hours ago, except the edges were crisp as cut paper. They formed a neat line leading from the workshop's blackened door to the place where we stood, as if someone had walked out to meet us, then turned around and went back inside. And somewhere within that half-buried workshop, deep behind the door, a bell rang once, small, clear, and perfectly timed, like the start of a shift. The door was the kind you expect in old illustrations, arched, reinforced with iron bands, carved with curling patterns that could have been vines or antlers depending on the angle. Snow had packed itself against the seams, yet the wood looked preserved, not rotted. I raised my gloved hand toward the handle and felt cold that didn't belong to air. It was a cold with intention, a cold that seemed to lean into my skin, searching for softness. Anya didn't come closer. She stayed by the aircraft, hand resting near her flare gun, eyes fixed on the structure like it might blink. "Record everything," she called. "Do not go in if you hear singing." Her voice sounded too loud in the hush, like we'd violated a rule by speaking at all. I turned my body camera on, then my tape recorder, because tape doesn't care about interference the way digital devices do. Or at least that's what I told myself. The footprints led right up to the threshold and stopped. No scuff marks, no sign of hesitation. Whoever made them had moved with purpose. I crouched, letting my flashlight skim the indentations. The tread pattern wasn't modern. It reminded me of old boots you see in museum displays, broad, practical, made for cold so deep it can crack teeth. At the edge of one print, embedded in the ice like an eyelash, was a single red thread. I plucked the thread free and watched it curl in the air. It was too vivid to be natural, a bright arterial red against the blinding white. It felt slightly waxed between my fingers, like it had been treated to resist water. I thought of stockings hung by fireplaces, of ribbons on gifts. Then I thought of sutures. Back at Jonah's office months earlier, he'd shown me a reproduction of a medieval map where the top of the world was illustrated with monsters and warnings. In the margin, someone had written in Latin, "Hic te sit nomen," here the name is silent. Jonah had pointed at that annotation with a trembling finger. "People think silence is just absence," he'd said. "But some cultures treat it like a presence, like a mouth held shut." I stepped onto the drift piled against the workshop and felt it hold my weight with the wrong kind of firmness, as if something beneath it was bracing. The handle was cold enough to sting through my glove. I turned it. The lock gave immediately, no complaint of rust, no reluctant creak. The door swung inward on hinges that moved like they'd been oiled yesterday. Inside was darkness that swallowed my beam. Not the soft darkness of an unlit room, but a dense, velvet black that made the flashlight look thin. The air carried a scent that hit me with such sudden nostalgia I nearly laughed. Pine resin, cinnamon, and something like hot sugar. It was the smell of December in a warm house. It was the smell of a lie. My light finally caught surfaces, wooden beams, shelves, long tables. Tools lay where they'd been dropped. Chisels, tiny hammers, awls, needles. It looked staged, like a museum exhibit designed to feel authentic. But the dust was wrong. There wasn't any. In an abandoned place, dust is the first honest thing to arrive. Here, Everything was clean in a way that made my throat tighten. Clean like a room after a surgery. I walked deeper, every step loud in my own ears. Somewhere above, in the rafters, a single icicle hung like a tooth. My breath came out in tight clouds, and each cloud seemed to hesitate before dispersing. On the nearest work table, a half-finished toy sat upright. It was a soldier, painted red and green with a cheerful grin. Its eyes were glossy black beads that reflected my flashlight like wet pupils. The soldier's mouth was carved open as if it were about to shout. When I leaned closer, I saw there was something stuffed behind the painted teeth. Not cotton. Not sawdust. A thin strip of paper folded so many times it looked like a tongue. My fingers moved before my mind caught up. I unfolded it with clumsy care. Was a name. Not printed. Not typed. Handwritten in careful, looping script as if the act of writing mattered. The letters looked older than my handwriting, older than the station ledger, older than the language it used. The moment I read it, a faint pressure gathered behind my eyes, like someone pressing thumbs against my temples. I dropped the paper and blinked hard. The soldier's bead eyes seemed to shine brighter for a second, and I had the irrational certainty that it was pleased to be seen. I backed away, bumping into a shelf. Something fell, clattering softly, too softly for wood. I looked down and saw a small bell, the kind you'd tie to a ribbon. It rolled once, then stopped on its own. A sound came from deeper inside the workshop. A scrape, slow and deliberate, like a chair being moved across a floor. My skin tightened along my arms. I told myself it was settling wood, contraction from temperature, the normal groans of structure in extreme cold. But it wasn't a groan. It was a purposeful drag, followed by a pause that felt like listening. I whispered Anya's name into my radio. Static answered, then a thin tone, then silence. I tried again, and this time I heard my own voice come back to me, delayed by half a second, warped as if it had traveled through a throat. The workshop didn't like radio. The workshop preferred voices it could own. I turned toward the entrance and froze. The door had swung closed. I stared at it, dumbly waiting for logic to return. I hadn't felt a draft. I hadn't heard hinges move. The wood looked flush in its frame, the iron bands unbroken. A simple thing, a door closing. Yet my chest started to ache with the certainty that something had just chosen to make this moment smaller. I crossed the room fast, boots thudding, and grabbed the handle. It turned. The door opened with the same smooth ease as before. Outside, the world had changed. The sky had dimmed, as if someone had turned down the brightness of day. The aurora, faint earlier, now hung low and thick, swaying like curtains in a room with no windows. Anya stood by the aircraft, but her posture was wrong. She was facing away from me, head tilted toward the horizon. Her flare gun hung limp at her side. I shouted her name. The sound felt like it was swallowed a few feet from my mouth. Anya didn't move. Then from far out on the ice came the softest jingle, bells, multiple, moving in a slow line. Not behind me in the workshop. Not above in the sky. Ahead, across the blank field, as if something was approaching at a patient walking pace. My tape recorder, clipped to my chest, clicked loudly as the spool turned. In my headphones, I heard a sound that made my stomach drop. Not bells, not wind, not tools. Breathing. Close breathing. Right next to the microphone. But I was standing alone in the open snow. Anya finally turned toward me, and her face looked pale in a way that had nothing to do with cold. Her eyes were open wide, unfocused, reflecting the aurora like she was staring at a screen only she could see. Her lips moved silently, shaping words without sound. I ran to her, grabbing her shoulders. "What did you hear?" I demanded, too loud, too desperate. Her mouth formed a sentence, slow and careful, like she was reading it off a page. "It knows your name," she mouthed. And behind her, on the untouched snow between us and the distant bells, new footprints began to appear one by one, pressed into the white as if an invisible body was walking toward us, step after step, without haste. I dragged Anya back toward the aircraft, fighting the strange resistance of the air. Each step felt like pushing through a room full of invisible threats. She stumbled at first, then moved with stiff obedience, as if her joints had forgotten the idea of choice. The footprints continued to form ahead of us, matching our pace, never accelerating, never falling behind, just keeping the distance constant like a rule. At the aircraft, I shoved Anya into the passenger's seat and snapped her harness closed with shaking hands. Her lips were still moving, silently repeating that sentence over and over, as if the words were the only thing left that belonged to her. I climbed into the cockpit, fingers clumsy on the switches, and cursed when the starter lagged. The engine coughed once, then stopped. The bells drew nearer. Not loud. Never loud. That was the worst part. Loud is honest. Loud is a threat you can point at. These bells stayed gentle, festive, almost apologetic, like someone trying not to disturb a sleeping child. My mind flashed to the station manager's warning, "Do not bring a list." In my bag behind the seat was a notebook filled with names of people connected to the records I'd gathered, explorers, archivists, translators, names I'd written to keep them straight, names I'd carried into this place like offerings. Anya's head turned toward the workshop, eyes still unfocused. Her voice finally worked, but it came out thin and monotone. "It moved," she said. "Not the workshop. The story. The story moved so people would stop looking." She swallowed, and the swallow sounded loud in the cabin. It doesn't like being remembered correctly. The engine caught on the second attempt. A low rumble vibrated through the frame, and for a moment I felt relief so sharp it was almost pain. Then the rumble deepened into something else, an uneven pulse like the aircraft was breathing wrong. The dashboard lights flickered. The compass spun. The GPS screen filled with static, then displayed coordinates that were not ours. Coordinates that matched the scratched-out ledger. The aircraft didn't want to leave, or something outside didn't want it to. I pushed the throttle forward anyway, forcing motion into a world that preferred stillness. Snow kicked up behind us. The bells did not get louder, yet I felt them closer, like they were inside my ribcage rather than outside the windshield. As we lifted, the aurora surged and folded, throwing green and violet light across the ice. The workshop below looked smaller from the air, almost harmless, like a child's toy half buried in a drift. Then the roofline shifted, not physically, not in a way the camera could easily prove, but in the way my brain interpreted it. The angles seemed to rearrange themselves into a shape that was briefly, unmistakably, a face. A face made of architecture. Windows as eyes, chimney as a crooked tooth, the door as a mouth that knew how to hold silence. The sight hit me with such primal certainty that my hands loosened on the controls. The aircraft dipped, corrected, and my heart hammered like it wanted out. Anya made a sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't so empty. "That's why it was scrubbed," she said. "Not because it was embarrassing, because it was contagious." She turned her head toward me slowly. "If you hear the right version of the story, it spreads. It makes room for itself." Back in the warmth of the research station, if you can call it warmth, I spread our evidence across a metal table. The red thread, the bell, the name strip from the toy soldier sealed in a bag. I played the tape recorder out loud. The hiss filled the room. Then, beneath it, the workshop rhythm returned, tap, scrape, tap, followed by that close breathing. The station manager stood in the doorway, face hard. "Turn it off," he said. I didn't. I should have. Because the tape did something I've never heard audio do. It began to change the room. Not physically, no lights exploded, no walls bent, but the feeling of the space shifted. The corners seemed deeper. The ceiling felt higher. The silence between sounds thickened until it felt like cotton packed in ears. The manager crossed the room and slapped the recorder off with the speed of a reflex. The sudden quiet was worse. It left behind an impression, like the afterimage of a bright light. He stared at the red thread in my evidence bag as if it were a live wire. "You found it," he said, and it wasn't a question. "The first place. The place they sealed." He rubbed his thumb against his palm, a nervous habit. "People think the move was for efficiency. That the new workshop is bigger, warmer, closer to shipping routes." He snorted, humorless. "No. The move was a retreat." He didn't like saying certain words. I noticed how he avoided names, how he referred to Santa only as the Maker, like giving the familiar title too much weight might summon attention. He told us about a winter that didn't appear in any official record. A winter when supply drops failed, when compasses rotated, when radio operators heard their own voices whisper back from the static. A winter when children across scattered Arctic settlements reported the same dream, waking to see a figure at the foot of their bed, not Santa, not anyone kind, but something tall and blank-faced, holding a list. They called it different things, the manager said. The quiet one, the white auditor, the listener. He looked from me to Anya as if measuring how much truth we could survive. It didn't want toys. It wanted names. It wanted to know who was known. Anya's hands trembled around a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking. "So Santa fought it?" she asked. The manager shook his head once, slow. "Not fought. Bargained." He lowered his voice. "The folklore says the Maker learned that joy is loud. Laughter, songs, carols, noise that fills a house and makes it hard for other things to listen. So he built joy like a fortress. But the listener adapted. It learned to hide inside quiet traditions. Inside lists. Inside the moment you hold your breath to hear bells. My notebook sat open on the table, pages filled with names. The manager's gaze landed on it and hardened. "I told you," he said. "No list." "I didn't know," I said, and the words sounded pathetic even to me. "You didn't need to know," he replied. "You needed to obey." He made us burn the notebook in a steel sink. Page after page curled black, the ink turning to glossy blisters before flaking away. As each name disappeared into ash, the station's oppressive stillness eased slightly, as if something had been chewing on those letters and was now forced to swallow smoke. That night Anya slept like a stone, but I couldn't. I sat by the small window watching the aurora twitch. The station felt safer than the workshop, yet the silence had learned the shape of my thoughts. I kept seeing the toy soldier's grin and the strip of paper tucked behind its teeth. I kept thinking about how neatly it had been folded, like someone had practiced. A cinematic horror thumbnail scene at the North Pole. A massive half-buried wooden workshop with iron-banded doorway pitch black like a void, green aurora swirling overhead, blowing snow frozen midair. In the foreground a small brass bell wrapped in vivid red thread resting on the snow, crisp footprints leading from the bell to the door. Subtle tall shadow silhouette inside the doorway, ominous but not fully visible. Extreme contrast, dramatic rim light, teal and green color grayed with a single red accent, ultra detailed, sharp focus on bell and footprints, slight depth of field, photoreal 16:9, no text, no watermark, no logos. I didn't call Jonah immediately. I stared at the radio as if it might sprout a hand. The scratching sound returned, slow, patient, then stopped like the writer had paused to dip a quill in ink. The station manager's warning replayed in my head with sick clarity. Some versions of a story spread. Some pieces of knowledge behave like infections. If I called Jonah and told him what I'd heard, would that protect him, or would it complete a circuit? I compromised in the way frightened people do. I sent Jonah a message with no details, only urgency. Do not open your office. Do not listen to old recordings. Leave now. It looked ridiculous as soon as I hit send. It looked like paranoia. It looked like the kind of message you ignore because life is busy and fear feels dramatic from a distance. Anya woke with a start just before dawn, gasping as if she'd been underwater. She clutched her throat and whispered, "It was in my mouth." Her eyes darted to the evidence bag with the bell. It wants the sound of being invited. We argued about returning to the workshop. I wanted to, because the only way to understand a trap is to study its teeth. Anya refused because she'd felt those teeth close around her thoughts. The station manager settled it by locking our fuel access and threatening to radio the authorities. "You don't get to make this worse because curiosity feels holy," he snapped. Then his anger drained, leaving only exhaustion. "That place is not abandoned. It's contained." Contained. That word lodged in my ribs. I spent the day reviewing modern satellite imagery on a battered workstation the station used for ice tracking. Most of the data was normal: ice drift, pressure ridges, the slow fracture patterns of a living frozen ocean. But the coordinates near the first workshop had a persistent anomaly, a faint blur as if the sensor couldn't resolve the image cleanly. Not cloud cover. Not glare. A deadened patch that repeated across different passes and different instruments. The station manager leaned over my shoulder and muttered, "The sky forgets it too." That evening the station lost sound. Not completely. We could still hear footsteps, the clink of mugs, the thud of doors. But voices dulled as if the air had thickened around our mouths. Words came out muffled, swallowed by a layer of pressure. It was subtle enough at first that you'd blame fatigue. Then it worsened until speaking felt pointless, like shouting into a pillow. Anya tried to laugh it off and couldn't. Her laugh came out as a dry wheeze. She pressed her palms to her ears and shook her head violently, like she was trying to dislodge water. I watched her and felt something bloom behind my own eardrums. A soft, anticipatory hush, like an audience waiting for a performance to begin. The tape recorder in my pack clicked on by itself. I hadn't touched it. The batteries were removed. Yet the spool turned, and a tiny microphone captured the station's new, muffled quiet with hungry precision. Then the workshop rhythm bled into the audio. Tap, scrape, tap, closer than before. Close enough that I could distinguish textures. Metal on wood, a blade drawn from a sheath, the soft brush of fabric against a table. The station manager lunged for the recorder, but Anya grabbed his wrist. Her eyes were wide and wet. "Wait," she mouthed, though the word barely made sound. She reached toward the speaker, trembling as if compelled. From the recorder came a voice, not the list reader, but something softer. Something that wore kindness like perfume. "Anya," it said. Hearing her name spoken from a machine in that gentle tone made my stomach flip. Anya's face slackened in relief for a heartbeat, as if a friend had called across a crowd. That reaction terrified me more than any scream would have, because it meant the thing behind the voice understood exactly which shape to press into a person to make them open. I snatched the recorder and slammed it into a metal drawer, then jammed the drawer shut and sat on it. The sound didn't stop. It leaked through steel like set. "Eli," the voice said next, and this time it wasn't gentle. It was pleased. I felt a pressure at the base of my skull, as if invisible fingers were lifting the back of my head to expose my throat. Images flashed across my mind, the workshop door closing, the toy soldier's bead eyes, the strip of paper unfolding like a tongue. I realized with nauseating clarity that the name strip hadn't been hidden in the toy. It had been stored there, like a file, like a tooth holding a sliver of meat. I ran to my bag, tore it open, and pulled out the sealed evidence. The red thread, the bell, the name strip. My hand shook so badly I fumbled the clasp on the bag. The station manager grabbed my wrists and forced my hands still, his grip bruising. He leaned close and spoke into my ear, the words barely audible but sharp with urgency. "Do not read anything out loud. Do not answer it. Do not complete the pattern. Pattern. List. Names. Sound." The station's lights flickered, and in the brief dimness I saw frost creep along the inside of the window in branching, delicate lines that resembled handwriting. When the lights steadied, the frost remained, forming looping strokes like script. I leaned closer, heart pounding, and my breath caught. The frost had formed my name. Not just once. Over and over, layered, as if a child had written it repeatedly for practice. Anya made a strangled noise and pointed at the far wall. In the corner where metal shelving met concrete, a patch of shadow had deepened into a shape, taller than a person, too narrow, like a coat hung on nothing. It didn't move. It didn't need to. The room changed around it, bending perception the way heat bends air. Then from the shadow came the smallest sound, a bell jingle right at the edge of hearing. I wanted to run. I wanted to attack it. I wanted to shut my eyes and wake up somewhere warm and ordinary. Instead, I did the only thing that felt remotely like control. I grabbed the red thread and yanked it free of the evidence bag, ignoring the manager's hiss of protest. The thread seemed to resist for a fraction of a second, like it was anchored to something far away. I wrapped it around my fingers until it cut into my glove, then tied it around the bell's loop and pulled tight. The bell stopped jingling. The shadow in the corner seemed to waver, as if annoyed. Anya stared at me, confusion and fear battling on her face. I realized I'd made an assumption without proof, that the bell was a lure, that thread and bell belonged together, that binding one would bind the other. It was a desperate ritual invented in the moment, based on nothing but instinct and old stories of red string and containment. For a heartbeat it worked. The station's air loosened. Voices regained a fraction of clarity. The oppressive hush retreated like an animal pulling back from fire. Then the recorder began to play again, louder now, as if amused by my attempt. "Good," the voice said, warm as candlelight. "You're learning." The shadow in the corner did not advance. It didn't need to, because the station door, 3 heavy locks, bolted from the inside, clicked once, then swung inward as smoothly as an oiled hinge. No wind rushed in. No snow blew. The open doorway revealed only darkness, thick and waiting, like the inside of the workshop. And from that darkness came the sound of footsteps, finally, unmistakably, approaching at a measured pace. Not rushing. Not hunting. Arriving. The station manager backed away from the open door, face drained of color. He raised his hands as if the darkness might be negotiated with, palms out like a priest facing an altar he no longer believed in. His lips moved in a silent prayer, or maybe in a name he refused to speak aloud. Anya stood frozen beside the table, eyes wide, mouth open, as if sound had abandoned her again in panic. I held the bell wrapped in red thread so tightly my fingers cramped. The thread bit deeper, and I felt warmth bloom under my glove where the skin must have split. The bell stayed silent, but the silence around it felt tense, like a held breath. Footsteps crossed the threshold. The darkness in the doorway didn't spill forward the way you'd expect a person to. It remained pooled at the frame, as if the thing stepping through carried its own absence of light, contained around it like a cloak. My flashlight beams skated across that absence and failed to find edges. Then the thing spoke, and the station's air shaped itself into the sound. "You came to know," it said. The voice was not monstrous. That was its strategy. It sounded like a teacher, patient and mildly amused. "Knowing makes room." The station manager shook his head violently. He forced out words, hoarse and muffled. You were sealed. Pause. The slightest bell jingle like laughter behind a hand. Seals are for doors, the voice replied. Not for stories. I realized then the move, the relocation of the workshop, had never been about distance. It had been about narrative architecture. Santa didn't just pack up and leave. He rebuilt the myth into something louder, brighter, easier to repeat without deviation. A new workshop, a new address in a collective imagination. A decoy that people could chant every year until the chant itself became a wall. In the old site, the original workshop wasn't simply abandoned. It was a sink. A place to dump the wrong version of the story and bury it in snow. Except I had dug. The voice continued, smooth as ink. The maker learned to drown me in joy. Songs, bells, lists that end in laughter. Another pause, softer now. But he also learned something else. That names are hooks. That once a name is written, it can be pulled. My throat tightened. I thought of the name strip behind the toy soldier's teeth. A hook hidden in a grin. Anya whispered, barely audible but real. It's not here for us, she said. It's here for what we carried. The names. The recordings. The station manager's gaze flicked to my pack, to the drawer where the tape recorder still played faintly through metal, to the evidence on the table. His jaw clenched. In that expression I saw the shape of an old decision, repeated. Containment is never clean. Containment always has a cost and someone always pays it. He moved fast. He grabbed the evidence bag, the bell, the thread, everything, and shoved it into a burn barrel near the back wall. He yanked a can of fuel from a shelf and dumped it in without hesitation. His hands were steady now, the steadiness of someone who has rehearsed this disaster in his mind for years. I lunged toward him, shouting, but my voice died in the thickened air. The darkness at the doorway seemed to tilt its attention toward the barrel like a head turning. The manager struck a match. The flame flared bright, impossibly bright in that muffled room, and for an instant I saw the darkness's outline. Not a body, not a face, but a distortion in space like a tall tear in the world. The match dropped into the barrel. Fire roared upward, and the smell that filled the station wasn't fuel or smoke. It was pine resin and hot sugar, the workshop scent, burning into something acrid and ancient. The bell wrapped in red thread blackened, and as it heated, it emitted the faintest ring, not from movement but from metal expanding. A pained, involuntary note. The darkness reacted. The station's corners deepened. Frost raced across the walls again, handwriting forming at frantic speed. Names. Lines of them layered and overlapping. I saw Jonah's name appear, then vanish beneath another. I saw Anya's name 3 times in different scripts. I saw my own so often it looked like a pattern rather than a word. The voice sharpened. You think fire erases? It asked, and for the first time it sounded irritated, still controlled but less amused. Fire is only another way to write smoke. The burn barrel's flames leaned sideways as if pulled by a draft that didn't exist. They stretched toward the doorway, toward the darkness, like eager tongues. The station manager coughed violently and staggered back, eyes streaming. Anya grabbed his arm, trying to pull him away, but he shook her off and pointed at me. His lips formed words I could barely hear. Don't repeat it. Don't repeat the story. Don't repeat the names. Don't give it a clean version to travel in. The tape recorder's muffled audio rose in volume, as if the metal drawer had become a speaker. The workshop rhythm turned frantic. Tap, 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 then stopped abruptly. In the sudden hush, a different sound came through. A pen scratching fast, furious like someone racing to finish a list before the paper runs out. The darkness in the doorway shifted forward by a fraction. Not a step. A correction. Like a sentence continuing. Anya grabbed my sleeve and yanked me toward the emergency exit at the back. We stumbled through, dragging the station manager between us. The cold outside hit like a slap, clean and brutal, and the shock of it cleared my head enough to think in sharp lines again. Behind us, the station's main door slammed shut on its own. From inside came no explosion, no obvious collapse. Just a long, deep quiet, as if the building had decided to stop making any sound at all. The aurora overhead twisted into tighter bands, green light coiling like rope. We ran for the aircraft. At the edge of the airstrip, Anya stopped so abruptly I nearly collided with her. She pointed at the snow in front of us. A trail of footprints had formed there, neat and crisp, leading away from the station and toward the horizon, leading toward the coordinates of the original workshop. Except these prints were different. Smaller, lighter, child-sized. A slow dread crawled up my spine as the implications settled. The thing didn't just move through recordings and names. It moved through tradition, through repetition, through anything that made people lean in and listen. It wasn't content to be trapped in one building or one patch of ice. It wanted to travel the way Santa traveled, carried from mind to mind, house to house, year to year. In the aircraft, as Anya fought the controls and the station manager stared straight ahead with hollow eyes, I checked my phone for Jonah's reply. A single message waited, timestamped minutes ago. Heard bells in my hallway. Office door was open. Didn't open it. What? Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. Then the message updated. Another line appended as if he'd typed it while moving. Someone left a toy soldier on my desk. It has my name in its mouth. My hands went numb. I looked down and realized I was still wearing the red thread around my fingers. Not the same thread, we'd burned it, but a strand was looped around my glove anyway, thin as hair, bright as blood, as if it had never left. Outside the windshield, the aurora pulsed, and for the briefest moment the green light looked like letters. I didn't read them. I refused. I kept my eyes forward and my mouth shut and my thoughts as loud as I could make them without sound. Because if this investigation taught me anything, it's this. The bright, new workshop we all picture so easily might not just be a symbol of joy. It might be a distraction we repeat every year to keep the dark version from being remembered correctly. And if you've listened this far, if you've held your breath for the bells, be careful what you repeat after this. Some stories don't end. They relocate.